Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. We are here today. It's March 27th. We're one day out from the Sweet 16 tipping off, and that's going to be our focus throughout today's episode, diving into the Sweet 16 matchups that lie ahead again beginning tomorrow night, Thursday night. There'll obviously be 4 games on Thursday and then 4 more on Friday, and then we will get into the Elite Eight, and we will be diving into all of that today. Again, thank you for joining me here on All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. Make sure you are subscribed right here to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. If you are joining us here live, please feel free to leave a comment, ask any questions you may have about the NCAA tournament, anything that's already happened, anything that's coming up over the next few days. Also, you can find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show on Spotify or wherever you do listen to your podcast episodes. Those are up every Monday and Fridays in the morning. And then you can find all of my work, whether it be written work via KentuckySportsRadio.com, part of the On3 Sports Network. Obviously, this YouTube show, my podcast, all of that good stuff lives on my Twitter account at BRamseyKSR. I guess we will mention off of the top here something that just kind of went live. I think probably Jeff Goodman was the first, at least that I saw, report it. But that Pat Kelsey has emerged as the name for the Louisville Cardinals, and boy, has that been a coaching search. I'm not here. Obviously, yes, I'm a Kentucky fan, but I'm not here to throw shade at the Cardinals. It's not really what I do. But let's start here. If they hire Pat Kelsey, I think that's a very, very good hire. That's somebody that, let's say there would have been a change at the top of Kentucky. Let's say Coach Calipari would have gotten fired this year. I'm not going to say that Pat Kelsey would have been in my top 3 to 5 even. I don't think that Kentucky would need to go down to a mid-major level, but I would have supported it, honestly, if he would get that job. And to me, he's somebody who, down the road, I could absolutely see being the next Kentucky coach. If he has a couple of good years at Louisville, and then it's time, whoever decides, and whether it's Coach Cal going out on top as a champion or getting fired or whatever it may be, I think that he's somebody that I could see being the next coach at Kentucky. He has that persona. He's a very, very, very high energy guy that I think is going to be perfect at changing the culture around Louisville basketball, which I think is as big of a job as anything right now. The stuff on the court will take care of itself if you just get it out of this dumpster fire situation where there's all this weird stuff constantly going on around the program with, players quitting or, different scandals or different things coming out of the locker room. Pat Kelsey's going to clean all that up from day one. You're going to have a competitive atmosphere around that building. And he's a Midwest guy as well. I mean, he's a longtime successful high major assistant. Obviously, for a guy that at his age has a pretty extended track record as a head coach, probably went through it for 10 years or so now at Charleston, and highly successful for 3 or 4 years. So I actually think that's a really good hire. Now, the Kentucky fan in me laughs at the fact that we were, Scott Drew, Eric Musselman, Jerome Tang, all these different names from the high major ranks, kind of their dream scenarios. Well, none of those were I'm not an insider. I have no idea, but I just can't imagine that any of those were ever actually candidates. I'm sure Louisville wanted to hire them, but I don't think they were ever viable candidates. Why would any of those people? Now, the Louisville job it's a top 10 job when it's good, but it's so bad right now. I don't think it is a top 10 job right now. I think Pat Kelsey is the guy that can get it back to being a top 10 job. Absolutely, I do. And I think that could happen in literally 1 or 2 years. But as we sit here today, Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, Louisville is not a top 10 job. And I think that some people maybe nationally don't realize the damage that has been done to the Louisville name and to that program. And that's why it was always unrealistic for some of these guys to end up at Louisville. And that's why you end up, quote unquote, and Pat Kelsey, he might be a better basketball coach than all these people, who knows? And he might win a national championship in 4 years at Louisville. And if he does, more power to him. But you end up quote unquote just hiring, one of the 3 or 4 hottest mid-major names in the cycle. So that just shows you what Louisville is right now. And again, I'm not being a hater. I don't hate Louisville the way that other Kentucky fans hate Louisville. It's not me, but it just shows what they've fallen to over the last few years. That you can't go get the high major name that you want, or you can't just go make a splash hire. You're now a kind of that stepping stone job where you are looking at the hot mid major names as your candidates. You're not looking at your peers as your candidates. So I want to go ahead and obviously talk about that, since that news is essentially breaking as we speak here on All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. So let's get into what we have to talk about for today, and that's diving a little bit deeper into these Sweet 16 matchups. Let's begin up in the East region. These are 2 games that will be played tomorrow night, again Thursday night, starting with, and this is great how it works out. The very first Sweet 16, or let's see, is that actually true? One of the other games tip off first. Okay, so I guess Arizona Clemson technically will tip off first at 7:09, but then at 7:39, we will get a rematch of last season's national championship game between number 1 seed UConn and number 5 seed San Diego State. I guess, let's see, last season when these two played, would it have been a 4 and a 5? I guess UConn was a 4 seed last year when they won it. So I believe San Diego State was a 5. So you get that rematch, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out this time around. Now, I think the guard play is going to be the difference here. When you have guys on the Huskies, like obviously Tristan Newton, first-team All-American this year, who's just had a fantastic season this year as a senior, fifth-year senior for the Huskies. 6'5" point guard, brings him some size there as well. Playing next to Cam Spencer, another. He's a fifth-year guy too. I mean, you just have so many games under their belt, and those guys are super talented too. They're not necessarily your everyday fifth-year senior, because these guys are so darn good at this point too. Cam Spencer then also provides you some high-level three-point shooting at 44% a game. He's made 92 threes. In a couple more games, he's ended up with over 100 threes this season. That's one of the best shooters in the country. Speaking of which, Alex Karabin up there as well in the wing. 75 threes now at like 38.7%. It looks like off the bench. You get Stephon Castle now for the Huskies. I guess he's been back in the starting lineup now. So, and then obviously around the basket, Donovan Clingan is a game changer defensively. And I just don't know if the Aztecs have the pieces to match up here. Now, the X factor and the difference could be their own All-American, Jadion Ledee. He's a bruising presence in the front court. And I think that physicality alone could provide some issues for UConn, but I just don't think that there's the firepower elsewhere. Like Micah Parrish, Lamont Butler, those guys are good players, but they're essentially I don't want to call them non-shooters. They're not very good three-point shooters. It's not what they do best. They want to be physical. They want to drive it. They want to score it around the rim first and foremost. And if you're not going to make threes against this team, I think it's going to be really tough, because then you're going to drive it in there around Donovan Clingan. It's going to be really, really hard at the rim. So unless Jadion Ledee's physicality is just at another level in this game, and he can, truly go for, if he has like 35 points and 16 rebounds, maybe they have a chance. I just have a hard time imagining that a team that kind of relies on things around the basket and scoring in the paint, I don't know if that's going to be the recipe against this Huskies team, who's going to be so good at defending around the basket. They're 4th in the country per KenPom, which I'm looking at right now. Opponents shoot 43.5% from 2-point range against them, whereas the Aztecs are 51.7%. So there's a pretty big gap there, and I just think it's really hard to see the path forward for San Diego State in that matchup. I'm going to pull up quickly here my FanDuel Sportsbook app and take a look at what the spread is. We did guess the lines the other day. I forget, like I might have guessed this one at like 8.5 or so. Let's see what it is. It's 10.5. So we double figure spread. And Travis in the comments here says, "What's the score prediction?" Let's see. I know you're going to ask me at some point for the Kim Palm anyway. Kim Palm has this one 73-65 UConn. The over/under on FanDuel is 135.5. So, on FanDuel. So Ken Palm has this game going over, but an 8-point spread, which would cover it, obviously, for San Diego State again at 10.5. I mean, we got burned a couple of times in the round of 32 in terms of some games just kind of turning into blowouts. I think at this level, it's hard to imagine a Sweet 16 game again. Rematch the national championship game. San Diego State's good. They're obviously very good. It's hard to imagine this being a double figure game, but UConn by 7 or 8 is it seems pretty likely. I kind of like that Ken Palm score, 73-65. I think it actually could maybe even be a little bit higher scoring than that, because both of these teams are pretty darn efficient. So I kind of think that they'll have a chance to go over. That'd probably be my play here, if anything. But at the end of the day, I think that the Huskies move on. In the nightcap there, Iowa State against Illinois. This is, certainly two contrasting styles. Iowa State is elite defensively. I believe they're still number 2 in Ken Palm. They're actually up to number 1. My goodness. They're now number 1 in defensive efficiency per Ken Palm after winning both of their games in pretty dominating fashion in terms of what they did defensively. Held South Dakota State to 65 in the opening rounds, held Washington State to 56 in the second round. Again, this is a situation where do they have the firepower to keep up with Illinois? Now, you could also say, can Illinois guard Iowa State? Because Illinois is outside of they started, okay, they're up to 92nd. Woo! Yeah, big improvement. They're up to 92nd now in defense, but just an awesome storyline here. The number 1 adjusted offensive efficiency in Illinois, number 1 adjusted defensive efficiency in Iowa State. What wins out here, in my opinion, and I know defense wins championships and all that good stuff, but I think at this point in the season, I would generally take the offensive team over the defensive team. Now, you can maybe argue that Iowa State is better at offense than Illinois is at defense, if that makes sense. Like, we know that Illinois is the elite offensive side of the spectrum. We know Iowa State is the elite defensive side of the spectrum. Is Iowa State's offense good enough to get to, 74, 75? But then, are you really going to hold Illinois? You're not going to hold them to the 60s. I don't think. They've scored 85 and 89 so far in their 2 games. It's going to come down to style of play in this one, really. But I've talked about it all year. I love the big guards of this Illini team. Terrence Shannon Jr., one of the best players in all of college basketball. Marcus Damas, he's just been excellent this season with what he can do. Coleman Hawkins is sort of a unique player that I think can spread Iowa State out a little bit as a 6'10" guy that can step out and shoot at some. I like Illinois to win this game straight up. They are still 1.5-point underdogs. I'm surprised to see that, honestly. Now, maybe that's some teams or some people trusting the Big 12 over the Big 10, but this is an Illinois team that's won 6 straight now. They obviously won the Big 10 tournament. I just think I think they're going to be able to make this game so that Iowa State just has a really hard time keeping up. And I think you see Ken Palm has this one 76-75 Iowa State. I see it more as a, 81-71 sort of game for Illinois. Just my opinion. I just quickly here, I just got a text about Pat Kelsey backing out of Louisville. So we might have a live react here. I'm just going to scroll Twitter. I apologize, but I just want to see if this is real. All right, here's from Matt Norlander. Here's what I have on Louisville per sources. Pat Kelsey has not agreed to become U of L's next head coach, nor has he signed any papers. nor has a verbal promise to Kelsey, nor has there been a verbal promise to Kelsey to be the next coach. Could get there fast, but at this moment, U of L, Pat Kelsey do not have a deal. Well, Louisville's going to Louisville, and this is going to continue to be an interesting situation to monitor. And heck, I might still react to it a couple times on this show. We'll see how long I go. Travis, I think so, Travis. I just think Illinois is a semi-significantly better team. Again, now, is there a world where Iowa State comes out and the physicality and what they can do defensively just kind of smothers them? I guess. But again, the size of those Illinois guards, like I just don't think that the pressure, like the ball pressure, like Iowa State putting their hands on you, all that stuff, I just don't think it's going to affect Illinois the same way that it does some of these other teams throughout the season. Let's stick with the Thursday games here. Let's move on down. I already mentioned the very first game tipping off on Thursday night. Tomorrow night will be 2-seed Arizona and 6-seed Clemson. I don't think any of us necessarily expected Clemson to be here. And heck, credit to the ACC. Much maligned throughout the season. They have 25% of the Sweet 16. Now, I'm not one that equates that to, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, gosh, we were all wrong about the ACC. The ACC is a really good conference. No, I don't believe that. Just because you win a couple of games in March doesn't change what we saw for an 18-game conference schedule. But PJ Hall, some of these guys. I mean, don't forget, Clemson was what? Clemson was 9-0, 11-1 to start the season. During that time, they beat Boise State, they beat TCU, they won at Alabama during that stretch. They beat South Carolina during that stretch. So this is a team that started off, playing like a top 20 team in the country. And I think they were at one point, but then stumbled kind of, especially early in ACC play. This is a team that was 4-6 at one point in ACC play before doing what they did down the stretch. Looked really impressive, in my opinion, against Baylor. A Baylor team that's been up and down. It's a team I always liked, but man, they sort of laid an egg there on Sunday evening, I guess that would have been. But I think that PJ Hall can be a difference maker in this one. If he's good enough to go against Omar Ballo and these big dudes, and they bring a 7'2" guy off the bench, the Wildcats do. Kashad Johnson is a bigger wing that's going to be really good for them. And then Caleb Love has that firepower that I just don't think that Clemson obviously has. But Caleb Love's also a guy that can shoot you out of some games. He's the A+ version of a guy like Wade Taylor IV for Texas A&M. That his floor is a little higher, and honestly, his ceiling is probably just as high. But the way that Wade Taylor down the stretch was able to just kind of will his way to the Aggies getting in that game against Houston, that's what Caleb Love does pretty consistently for Arizona. And he'll be the most talented player on the floor. I think that Arizona's size around the basket can negate what Clemson brings to the table on that front. This is a Clemson team that shoots 54.4% from two-point range. I don't see that continuing against Arizona. Again, this is an Arizona team that is one of the best in the country at the rim. They're 10th in adjusted defensive efficiency. Ken Palm has this one. I know Travis is wondering. Ken Palm has this one 79-74. Arizona. Let's check the spread. Arizona -7.5. So I guess they have Clemson covering. Gosh, this time of year, these spreads are so tough. Like, I can't imagine myself betting on Clemson in this game, but 7.5 points in a Sweet 16 game, maybe that's the move. But this is another one where, like, in my opinion, Arizona's 10 points better than Clemson, but maybe they're not right now. From what I've watched all season, I would tell you Arizona is 10 points better. But on the Sweet 16, on Thursday night, maybe it is a 5-point game. I guess we will see. But to me, either way, I think Arizona moves on. Like, maybe your move here is no, I'm not going to do that. I was going to say to take them in Illinois money line, but if Illinois is the underdog, there's no reason to necessarily do that. Finally, probably the game of the night, 9:39, or to follow the Arizona Clemson game of the night on CBS. Number 1 seed Alabama, number 4 seed North Carolina. Or sorry, I transposed that. Number 1 seed North Carolina, number 4 seed Alabama. This is a 3.5-point spread in favor of North Carolina. Over under set at 173.5. I'll tell you right now, North Carolina is good enough defensively. I'm probably going to lean towards the under in this game. I think that they have the athleticism on the perimeter. I think they have the horses to keep up with Alabama and make it hard for them at different times. You're not going to see this turn into the rock fight that was the Alabama Grand Canyon game, but let's not forget that game happened. We are just a few days removed from Alabama scoring 72 in a game that was, kind of on pace to be in the 50s or 60s most of the way. They pulled away late there in that one as Grand Canyon sort of collapsed at the end. Ken Palm has this one 86-84 in favor of North Carolina. So what's that? It's 170. So I guess they kind of agree with the under there as well. I've said all year I don't bet Alabama games because there's just so much variance with the way they can play in terms of 3-point shooting. If I had to pick a side, I like North Carolina. In this one, I'm probably just going to take a money line because I think that I just don't trust Alabama at this point in the tournament. If you're going to tell me that, I like Mark Sears a lot, but RJ Davis is the best guard in college basketball, probably. So I can bet on RJ Davis against some of these guys on Alabama. I can bet on Armando Bacot, that's been here before, been to a national championship game. Harrison Ingram, a veteran guy who hasn't maybe played at this level at Stanford, but has had an excellent season this year. It's hard to imagine North Carolina losing this one. We'll save some of Friday's matchups to talk about on Friday morning on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show. Went a little bit longer in some of this stuff than I expected, and we had a couple interruptions thanks to Pat Kelsey and the craziness that is Louisville. But I will touch on them quickly for those listening on Friday. We have, let's just go in order of tip-off here. So we have number 2 seed Marquette, number 11 seed NC State. On Ken Palm, let's do it this way. Let's just go with what they have. They say Marquette 78-72. On FanDuel, we have a 6.5-point spread in favor of Marquette. At some point, Cinderella's slipper has to not fit, you would think, for NC State. Now, this is a team that I was actually relatively high on in the preseason. If you go back and listen to my Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show ACC preview, I think I picked NC State certainly higher than what they ended up finishing, and then they needed that somewhat miraculous run, 5 wins in 5 days to win the ACC tournament, and they had 2 more wins in 3 days to reach the Sweet 16. Tyler Kolek, Cam Jones, just don't know if NC State has the guys like that to keep up in that game. 7:39 in the Midwest region. You have, to me, the second best matchup of this Sweet 16, one that I've pointed out since the bracket came out. That's number 1 seed Purdue against number 5 seed Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga is uniquely capable of beating this Purdue team. I think they're going to make it really, really hard in Zach Edey to guard in ball screen situations. I think that Anton Watson, Ben Gregg, some of these guys are going to stretch them out enough. Then you have Nembhard and these guys, or Ike, that can Nembhard making plays for everybody else. Ike scoring it around the basket. I think that it's going to get really hard. Nolan Hickman as well, that can stretch the floor as a shooter, 75 threes this year at over a 40% clip. I think it's going to be really hard for Purdue to match the pace and the space of this game. Now, I think it's going to become expressly important for Braden Smith to be the best guard on the floor in this game. On paper, he is. Probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, I think he would, because I think Braden Smith's really, really darn good. I tweeted about him when I watched Purdue play in person last Friday night against Grambling, how impressive he was on both ends of the court, his leadership qualities, all that. For a sophomore, he's off the charts. Nolan Hickman and Ryan Nembhard are good enough to play right with him. And I think it'll be interesting how this game gets played on both ends of the floor for the Bulldogs. I think Zach Yee's going to have his way with them when he's on offense, but I think the Bulldogs are going to have their way with him when he's having to play defense. And Ken Palm has this one 81-77 Purdue. You get 5.5 points on FanDuel right now. I can tell you this second, I'm taking Gonzaga. Probably going to take a money line as well, if we're being honest. The Indiana guy in me kind of wants Purdue to win the game. And by no means am I going to be shocked if they do. But let's face it, this Purdue team hasn't been one necessarily that you're going to trust at a high level in March the last few years anyway. So you're telling me that I can get, Mark Few, I can get these Gonzaga guys that have played their best basketball in February and March down the stretch here. Man, I'm jumping all over that on Friday night. Let's see, 9:39. Houston and Duke, obviously 1 seed. Cougars 4 seed. Blue Devils there. If Duke can shoot as many free throws as Texas A&M did, Duke will win this game because they just have more skilled players than Texas A&M does. I think their guards from 3-point range can maybe do a little bit more. Now, if Houston's allowed to put their hands on Duke's guards, if they're able to make them uncomfortable like the Cougars do so often now under Coach Kelvin Sampson, then I think it's going to be really, really tough for Duke. They're not necessarily going to have that strength and physicality in the backcourt to match up with Houston. And then, and I've said it all season, and it's rang true here in the NCAA tournament, Jamal Shed and LJ Cryer is what makes this Houston team different. They have enough offensive firepower to go win a game like they needed to, much higher scoring against Texas A&M on Sunday night. I continue to really like this Houston team. I think they're going to be able to take care of business against Duke. I guess quickly let's look at what Ken Palm has in store for that one. Houston 69-66. FanDuel -4.5 for Houston. Be laying the points there. I think Houston can win this one relatively handily. And then finally, we get 2 seed Tennessee, 3 seed Creighton. Really interesting matchup here. Dalton Connect, Baylor Shireman. That's going to be a fun matchup for those skilled, bigger wings. Ryan Kalkbrenner, I think, could be a difference around the basket in this game. Is Sky Ziegler, some of these smaller Tennessee guys that get in there. Even Dalton Connect, when he goes to try to score at the rim, it's going to be a lot harder with Ryan Kalkbrenner in his way. I think he'll be able to negate Jonas Adu a little bit on the offensive glass and some of the things he does around the rim for the Volunteers. So I actually like this matchup for Creighton to some extent, but I think that Tennessee is good enough defensively to ultimately find a way in this game. Ken Palm has it 73-71. FanDuel has Tennessee -2.5. Again, to me, what makes we talked about what makes Coach Kelvin Sampson's Houston team different is LJ Cryer and Jamal Shed. I think what makes Coach Rick Barnes' Tennessee team different this year is their floor is higher because of Dalton Connect. They can survive that offensive drought, that offensive kind of inepticism that they have sometimes, because Dalton Connect in that last game, really a rock fight, struggled offensively. Dalton Connect scores 18, and they just help you get there. So we'll see how that one goes. Like I said, I like the matchup a little bit for Creighton. I think that they match up relatively well for Tennessee, but when one of the teams has Dalton Connect, I'm going to roll with them. But yeah, I mean, you're right, Travis. Creighton has some guys that can make it tough for him too. And they have some backcourt firepower. Trout Alexander, Mason Miller, those guys that can do some things and score enough against even a vaunted Tennessee defense to make it tough. So I'll just run through quickly. I think UConn advances. I think Illinois advances. I think North Carolina advances. I think Arizona advances. I think Tennessee, I'm going to go ahead and take Gonzaga. That's probably kind of my upset pick, I guess. Then I think Marquette and Houston move on. So slight upset in Illinois and then a bigger upset with Gonzaga. Otherwise, I'm going to keep rolling with chalk here in the Sweet 16. I'm going to give, bear with me for a second, I'm going to give One quick scroll through of Twitter just to make sure that nothing is flown off the rails here in the Louisville situation. Scrolling through, Coach Pat Kelsey. All right, well, we also have Mitch Barnhart and John Calipari doing a TV interview together with official media partner WLEX and local show BBN tonight at 7:30 p.m. So that'll be interesting as well. So we've had some Kentucky news, we've had some Louisville news during today's live show. That's what makes doing these live so fun is, we were kind of breaking some news together as we went through it, but nothing imminent right now on the Louisville coaching hire situation. But to me, they just need to get it done with Pat Kelsey. You can't let this, especially now that it's got out, like, talk about train wreck city at this point. If they don't hire Pat Kelsey and they have to then go, another rung through, wherever they're looking, that's going to be a horrendous look for the Cardinals. But we'll let that play out. Give me a follow on Twitter at BRamseyKSR to keep up with any of that news. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. Thank you to those who are watching live. Thank you to those who are watching sometime in the future. You can just leave a comment here. Make sure you like the video as well. That helps grow the channel. Subscribe to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show here on YouTube if you have not done so already. Find the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show via podcast as well. Again, I'll be breaking down Friday's games a little bit more in depth there Friday morning as well. And then give me a follow on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Continue to enjoy March Madness. We get another excellent weekend here. Obviously not as many games as last weekend, but, in theory, some higher level games. So that's always a lot of fun. And the next time we talk, we're going to we'll have a Final Four to talk about, and that is obviously super exciting. So thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in to All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey, and we will talk again next week. Have a great weekend.